Good afternoon. God bless you on this afternoon. We're grateful to be here for another clergy conversation. And today I'm super excited. You can see the look on my face, how excited I am to be interviewing one of God's great preachers, one of my personal mentors, heroes, and like I affectionately call him, Uncle Coop, which we'll dive more into going throughout this broadcast. But I'm so happy to have Reverend Dr. Lee E. Cooper Jr., the proud pastor of the Prospect Missionary Baptist Church of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Uncle Coop is with us today, and I'm just so grateful to have Uncle Coop here. So, Uncle Coop, introduce yourself.
Pastor G. Chris Brown, it is wonderful to be able to be here with you on today, and I thank God for this privilege, of course, to be with you, and have been looking forward to it. And so I'm grateful to God, certainly for what you're doing and your ministry, and I'm just excited to be here.
Yes, sir. Well, Uncle Coop, first of all, as we start this, just talk to us about your background, where you're from, and just growing up in high school. Talk to us about your background as we get started.
Well, I'm from the east side of Oklahoma City, and grew up on the east side, Pitts Park. We opened Pitts Park, okay? So people want to talk about how bad Pitts Park was, but we opened it. And so Pitts Park I'm one of those Pitts Park babies in Northeast Oklahoma City. Graduated from Southeast High School in Oklahoma City, and went to University of Central Oklahoma for a year, called into ministry, transferred to Bishop College, where I graduated with my BA from Bishop College, left from there, and went to Virginia Union University. And part of the reason I ended up at Virginia Union was Dr. Henry Mitchell, who was over the Black Church Studies program at Colgate, which I had applied for and was accepted, and was headed to Colgate Rochester Divinity School in Rochester, New York. And he became dean at Virginia Union. And so I switched gears and ended up at Virginia Union, and graduated from there. Ended up getting called. I had a church in Virginia. Then ended up getting called here to Oklahoma City, and have spent the last 34 years as senior pastor of Prospect Church here in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
So, Uncle Coop, what was your home church growing up?
My home church was St. John Baptist Church. Dr. W.K. Jackson was my pastor for most of my life. Now, my early childhood was at Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church in Wewoka, Oklahoma. And then about 8 years old, we ended up moving our membership to the city. And under Dr. W.K. Jackson, just a tremendous mentor, and was a father, beyond just a father in ministry. He was as close as I could have to a stepfather,
Yes, sir.
particularly when my father passed away. But Dr. W.K. Jackson, just a tremendous man of God and a tremendous leader in the community.
Yes,
and so we thank God for his life and his legacy. But St. John Baptist Church in Oklahoma City.
and we know, Uncle Coop, that St. John is a historic church in our city. So, how was it growing up in St. John and seeing, Dr. Jackson and seeing the work that he was doing, and how that may have made an impression on you as it relates to ministry or church?
Well, Dr. W.K. Jackson quickly, even as a young person, you begin to just sense the admiration that other people and respect that other people had for Dr. W.K. Jackson. Just in terms of his legacy, Dr. W.K. Jackson led the sanitation strike here in Oklahoma City. He was one of those that was out front with the civil rights movement here in Oklahoma City. and often is overlooked in really history to his real role that he played in leading the civil rights movement and voters registration, all those things. So he was very active and civically involved, one of the founders for the Coalition of Civic Leadership, which was religious as well as secular. And some of the religious organizations would not allow for secular involvement, but he had that Coalition of Civic Leaders. And so he was leading that, very similar to the Southern Christian Leadership
Yes, sir.
Conference. So he was instrumental in doing that. But then he was always, Dr. W.K. Jackson was open to ministry and the cutting edges of ministry. So he was never, ever really locked into just what he understood as ministry, but he's always open to the move of God and what God was doing in the life of the church. And so he really kept all of the young ministers kind of around and talking to us and, asking us questions, as well as pouring into us what became foundational pillars for our ministry even today. And so he has sons in ministry, all over the country. And so that was kind of the thing. I mean, and those who may not know, St. John is one of the leading churches here in Oklahoma City, and so it was because of the leadership of Dr. W.K. Jackson.
So Uncle, when you talk about what Dr. Jackson poured into you all as young preachers, what were some of those nuggets that Dr. Jackson poured into you that you remember that help you in ministry even today, and those things that can help younger preachers and pastors like myself going forward?
Well, one of the things that he advocated for was training.
Yes, sir.
And he wanted that to be a formal education because he himself had gone to Bishop College and had graduated from Bishop College, knew how valuable education was for training a young man for ministry. So after I, accepted my call into ministry, and I grew up in the church, grew up, in the youth department, singing in the choir, all of those things. And immediately when I accepted my call in the ministry, he shipped me off to Bishop College in Dallas, Texas, which was the best move ever for a young man who was starting out in ministry. So he knew the value of education. He would say things like, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance.
Mm.
that's more expensive. Okay, so he would say things like that, but really it was him modeling, particularly in his day and time where he had gotten training.
Yes,
And he
sir.
knew the value of education. So he always pushed us for education. He always would, pour into us the importance of your spiritual development, your prayer life, your study habits, how you model and carry yourself. And he was always that example to do that. So those were some of the things that he poured into us that was just just priceless in terms of our preparation for a life of ministry.
Yes, sir. And so talk to us about your first sermon. Uh the day, talk to us about your first sermon. And
My,
the call to preach. When did you feel the call to preach, and when did you acknowledge the call to preach?
okay, well, my first call, I was like 16 years old,
Yes, sir.
and in that calling, uh, of course, we had a youth pastor who said to us, Pastor Keith Smith, who said to us, as young people in the youth department, he said to us, you don't just want to do something. You want to ask God what He wants you to do.
Mm.
And if you ask Him what He wants you to do, He'll tell you. Well, uh, I took that to heart and I began to pray as a young person, ask God what He wanted me to do with my life. I had a plan for my life. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And so I wanted to go to school. Wanted to major in marketing. I wanted to come out, be a businessman, at that time, get a job at IBM or somewhere, and, you know, have a nice career and all of that. Well, as I prayed about that, then the Lord just showed me one day when I got on the bus to actually go to school, high school. I got on the bus, and that's all I really remember about the trip on the bus. Because at that point, the Lord really gave me a vision that took me out of the bus. And He showed me that He wanted me to preach. And He was calling me to do that. I remember getting off the bus traumatized when I
Mm.
got to the school. Had to get off the bus, but traumatized by the thought that He wanted me to preach. And I was like, oh no, I don't, no, I can't, no, man, no, I don't want to, I want to have fun in life. I don't want to be in ministry. I want to have fun. And, and so that was at 16. Well, fast forward um, from 16 to 19 years old, I really tried to convince the Lord that I was not called and prove to Him
Mhm.
that I wasn't called because of all of the craziness that I was doing
Right.
in my life. Ultimately, surrendered at the age of 19. And I remember my first sermon like it was yesterday. And I remember the text, John 14 beginning verses 1 through 6, and I talked from the subject. Do you have your reservations?
Mm.
And so, in my father's house are many mansions, if it were not so.
Yeah.
And so, I remember that sermon. I may not remember what I preached last year, but I remember what I preached that first sermon.
Yes, sir. And so, how was it, preaching that first sermon? I know, I'm sure it was a lot of people, first sermon, and how was your nerves? Because I think, as we, even as young preachers, that first sermon is nerve wracking because of course you're already nervous preaching, and then you see all the eyes are on you, everybody's looking. So how was that first sermon, just from that aspect of just seeing basically all eyes are on you at that point?
Right. Well, I mean, Dr. W.K. Jackson was old school. And so we had to go before,
Right.
all of the deacons and make our confession. And they ask us all kind of questions and everything. When I preached my first sermon, there were 1,139 people in the
Wow.
sanctuary on that day at the
Wow.
St. John Church. And so I grew up in the church, and I had a lot of people pulling for me, but it was, of course, nerve wracking, you know, uh, but then there was the relief of getting that out and getting that over and knowing that I had confirmation from God to move forward. And out of that experience, it just uh, I moved forward from there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So that brings me to where I know I want to get to, and I know a lot of people, preacher friends of mine who know you as well. We want to get to this because Uncle Coop went to Bishop College, and us young preachers, we've heard so much about Bishop College, the history, the legacy, and me and you, we've had these conversations in your office, and you talked about the legacy of Bishop College. So this conversation is not just for clergy, but also just the history, Black history, in my opinion, about Bishop College. So talk to us about the experience of Bishop College.
Well, when I got to Bishop College, of course, uh, Bishop was well known for its history, its legacy. You think about all of the preachers back in that day. Many of them had gone through Bishop College. Your Manuel Scott Seniors, your C.A.W. Clarks, your C.B.T. Smiths, your Dr. W.K. Jacksons, your S.J. Gilbert's. I mean, the list just goes on and on of all of the preachers that had come through Bishop College. But Dr. W.K. Jackson said, "That's where you're going," and that's where I went. And so when I got to campus, then you had people, on campus, preachers who were students, who were really further along in ministry. Many of them at that time had recordings out. And so, when I got to school, it was a lot of people, who were accomplished in ministry already, young preachers. And so you're kind of thrown in that mix. And I think the thing that made Bishop College unique was not only the professors at the school, which were great professors, particularly in their areas of emphasis, but there was also this camaraderie, um, this challenge that came from your peers to be the best that you could possibly be, and it was really iron sharpening iron. So a lot of the preachers that you know about today were on campus. The Ralph Douglas Wesses, the Freddie Clarks, the Freddie Hayneses, and the list kind of goes on and on. All of those guys. Gregory Macon already had albums out. And in case people don't know what albums are, those are the waxes. So, but he had albums out, and I mean, just the peers that were on campus. Eugene Weathers, the Trent Meeks. I mean, just the whole peers. So. Um, one of the people uh, uh, who ended up being a roommate for a semester recorded, "I won't complain." So I mean, it just the peers of guys who were on campus uh, meant a lot to the development and the challenge to preaching.
Mhm.
So we would have access to Mount Tabor, which Mount Tabor Baptist Church, which was right across the street from the school.
Yes, sir.
And Pastor Harris would give us that ability to preach there at 8 o'clock on Sundays and on Sunday evening. And you know, when we preached at Mount Tabor, there was the peers that were there to critique everything that you said.
Right.
And so, but all of that was intimidating in some respects, but it also helped you to get better.
Yes,
And
sir.
so I think when I look back on that experience, oh, it was more than just the professors; it
Right.
was the peers.
Right. And so, Uncle, when you talk about the peers and you talk about that camaraderie, as you talk about, you were blessed to preach for the late Reverend Dr. Floyd Harris at Mount Tabor, and you and your peers, y'all are studying each other, but also pushing each other. So when you talk about that camaraderie, what was it about that camaraderie for you personally that made you, say that, okay, I want to be great. I really want to grow and develop. Because you said some of your peers were already recording albums. They were developed, in a way, like, because I know some people talk about Dr. Armin Brown, and they say Dr. Gregory Macon. You got some of your peers who are out there already on the circuit, in a way, if you can say. So what was it about those experiences and watching those guys that made you, and just you personally say, I want to be great?
Well, you really didn't have any choice.
Right.
You really didn't have any choice about it. Okay, you were going to strive to be the very best that you could be, or you were going to leave. And I'm
Mm,
here to tell you that not everybody could take that kind of pressure.
wow.
So many people left.
Mm,
Paul Jones was there. And he later recorded "I Won't Complain," but he didn't make it through Bishop College,
mhm.
because the pressure was just too much. So I mean, you had no choice. That if you were going to stay and you were going to stick, then you had no choice but to grow and develop. And so I think that's really what we look at. But then not only that, but every Friday we had chapel. Well, we actually had chapel three times a week, but on Fridays we had chapel. And the chapel services, you were required to go, but in those chapel services, we heard the greatest preachers of the day. Anybody who was coming through Dallas, Texas, or Fort Worth, Texas, uh, evangelists who were coming for the week at different churches, always had the invitation to come to chapel service. We heard the greatest preachers on Fridays every week. And then we had the L.K. Williams Ministers Institute, which was in April of every year. And the L.K. Williams Ministers Institute was the largest
Mhm.
institute of that day and that time. And so Hampton didn't become what it is today until after L.K. Williams stopped in Dallas, Texas.
Mhm.
So people talk about Hampton's Ministers Conference now, but it was nothing because Bishop College had the biggest and the best ministers conference going in the nation. And so that exposure, just that alone,
Yes,
uh,
sir.
allowed for the development of preachers. And then people like R.A. Williams, who was writing his own Sunday school curriculum uh, back at that time and in that day. So we had a chance to hear R.A. Williams tell us about what it means to actually, approach scholarly the Sunday school work and writing curriculum and those kinds of things. I mean, those kinds of experiences were
Mm.
just, invaluable. I mean, you just couldn't pay for it.
So, who were some of your favorite preachers that you heard during that time? Whether it was at chapel, across the city, who were some of your favorite preachers that you heard, and what was it about those particular preachers that really challenged you or made you want to develop?
Well, I think we heard the brightest and the best,
Hmm.
people of that time. So I remember Dr. Gardner C. Taylor. I remember Deering King. Most people don't talk about Deering out of Chicago, Illinois, because he really was not a hooper. But
Hmm.
we heard Donald Parsons, which was, one of my favorites in the day. So we had a real uh, development for different styles of preaching. Um, and preaching was more about personality, particularly in that day.
Yes, sir.
Of course, there were the Manuel Scotts, who you heard C.A.W. Clark's of that day, and R.A. Williams. I mean, you just heard a whole cadre of preachers, and they had a sense of personality. Preaching was more personality. Um, One of the things that I think is a challenge, even for today, is that a lot of preaching really sounds the same today.
Mm, okay.
Um, that back then, I think preachers developed almost in a vacuum of
Mm-hmm.
where they grew up, what they came from, and so now we have this exposure where everybody is exposed to the same kinds of preaching,
Yes, sir.
and most of us develop the text the same way because that's the way we've been trained to do it. Back in the day, you heard uh, different preachers sound differently,
Yes, sir.
and there was a broader spectrum than what we really see with preaching today. Uh, you know, for a long time, A. Lewis Patterson, uh, everybody said he couldn't preach.
Mm.
A. Lewis Patterson, he was
Wow.
known, uh, for being a miss. They said he couldn't preach,
Mm.
and then all of a sudden, he found him in that niche, and the rest is history. But for a number of years, they said he couldn't preach.
Mm.
And then he found that voice and became one of the greatest preachers of his day.
Wow.
So when we think about that, then that became the exposure. So later on, A. Lewis Patterson was one of my favorite preachers. And so I think there's a lot of guys that uh, I've admired over the years, and even some of my peers.
Yes, sir. So, and I think you hit on something that's very important, as Uncle Cruz. You talked about your personality and how you said some preaching, a lot of preaching makes sounds the same. So, what are keys for, especially like say young preachers, young pastors? What are keys that you see that you want to share for a preacher to develop their own personality? What are some keys that you've learned that you've even incorporated that you would want to share with us about developing your own personality as it relates to preaching?
Well, I think it's important to find your own voice, to be authentically you, because everybody else is already taken.
Yes, sir.
So you really want to find that voice to be you. When you look at a text, you're looking for what is the tension in this text? What is the argument in this text? How do you counter that argument? What does this text say? I don't have to make up what the text say. Let the text speak for itself. And as you're moving to really move through the text, um, you know, I say listen to other preachers, yes,
Mhm.
um, but also develop that voice in you. Fred Craddock talks about developing that voice in you. So you want to read about preaching, you want to study preaching, you want to have a good study habit, but you just want to be you. So the preaching, in my best estimation, is personality.
Yes, sir.
And so uh, you, it has to come off as authentic,
Yes,
uh,
sir.
because it really is you, allowing God to use you.
Yes, sir. And
So
so, go ahead.
when you hear a Gardner Taylor, he's very different than when you hear um, a Manuel Scott. Today, um, when you hear a Marcus Cosby, he's a lot different than when you hear a Frederick Haynes. So preaching takes on that personality that I think is crucially important.
Yes, sir. I appreciate
Because,
that.
yeah,
Go
at the
ahead.
end of the day, it has to be believable
Mm.
to the people who are hearing it.
Wow. Believable to the people who are hearing it.
That's what you're doing.
Yes, sir. My goodness, my goodness, you hit it. You hit a key note right there, Uncle Coop. So now you leave Bishop and you go to Virginia Union.
Yes.
Um, and I like how you talked about Dr. Henry H. Mitchell, who is one of my favorite authors. His books about the art of black preaching, the black church beginnings, his mind about talking about even expository preaching. So it's like you go from Bishop, then you go to another great Virginia Union with black church studies. So talk to us about your experience at Virginia Union.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me talk about Bishop. Now, its professors, Dr. T.W. Thompson,
Yes.
white Southern Baptist preacher, excellent in Old Testament. You had Dr. Mangrum, you had Dr. Seals, you had Dr. Dorothy Holloman, you had Dean Harry S. Wright. You had these people, these personalities that were big in a preacher's development. And I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it, but Dr. Mangrum was certainly um, one of those that challenged you to be your very best. And when I got to Virginia Union was a different experience. Virginia was heavily influenced by Dr. Ellison.
Okay.
And Dr. Ellison didn't believe in being, if a preacher was educated, that he should not be emotional in the pulpit. And that influence kind of rubbed off on a lot of churches
Mm,
that were silk stocking, straight laced kind of churches. And coming from Bishop College, that's not how we were trained.
right.
So and Henry Mitchell knew that, but Henry Mitchell came and recruited us. Now, every year, also,
Mm,
who Dr. Miles Jones is one of the truly technicians in terms of preaching, black preaching, and he would come to Bishop College every year for the L.K. Williams Ministers Institute and teach preaching. But uh, between Henry Mitchell and Miles Jones, uh, Virginia Union had a polish um, that Bishop didn't have.
okay.
And so every one of the professors, what made Virginia Union unique is that your Miles Joneses and other professors, all of them pastored churches.
Yes, sir.
So the theological education coming from the classroom was quite practical
Hmm.
in its application because they were John Kinney was
Yes,
pastor
sir.
at the church.
Yes, sir.
Okay? John Kinney pastored and preached every Sunday. Your Jerome Rosses, they preached every Sunday. They were pastoring churches. So it was not just um, academia, but it was a kind of a practical approach to all of this training that you're getting. And so it really polished us as preachers and helped us to understand beyond preaching ministry. And so that's what it looked like for us.
And I love Dr. John Kenny. He is one of the greatest preachers and minds like ever. I mean,
Yeah, right. Like what how did you come up with this? Where did this come
I
from?
mean, like seriously.
Yes, I swear, anyone who's listening, if you have not heard Dr. John Kenny, then you certainly want to make sure you do that because when you get to the pearly gates, they're going to ask you, did you hear Dr. John Kenny?
Oh yes, sir. I mean, he is definitely one of God's greatest preachers and greatest minds.
Just heavy and
Yes,
don't have to try to be heavy, you
I,
know?
just
He
as
don't
you
have to
say,
try
he
to
make
be
the
deep.
take. Yeah.
Yeah, don't have to try to be deep. He just is deep, you know?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so while you're in Virginia, you get called to your first church.
Yes.
So then talk to us about that experience of being a candidate, and how they found you, then, being called to your first church.
Can I skip over that experience? it, it was rough, and it was a lot different than anything that I knew or had experienced in church life. But that experience really helped me to grow and prepare me for when I got here. To be honest, they just kicked my hind parts,
Hmm.
and it was a real challenge, and I survived that experience. Um, and but I knew only when I got to Oklahoma City what the Lord was doing with me in that experience.
Yes, sir.
Because I came to a church in Oklahoma City that was a difficult church. I was the fourth pastor in 10 years at this church. But I'm here to tell you that everybody thought this church was, just a rough church. And I guess it was related to Oklahoma City. But they were kindergartens compared to what I had just left in Virginia. They were experienced, okay, and and they went to work on my hind parts, and but it developed me and built me to be able to handle the real challenges of leading a church, and particularly leading a church in the middle of crisis.
And that's why I want to get at Uncle Coop, because somebody may be listening, may be going through, a situation where they're at a church, but they are facing some tough times. They are getting beat up. They do have some wounds, or as Reverend Dr. H. Beaker Hicks would say, they're preaching and leading while bleeding. So what were some of those lessons that you learned from that experience that you can help us, that you can talk to us about still preaching and pastoring even though you're dealing with these challenges? What were some of those, what are some keys?
Well, one of the things I learned is that you can't use the pulpit as the place to be a whipping post and to be a place to air your grievances
Mm,
and fuss and whip the people over the pulpit.
yes,
Uh,
sir.
I learned that in that experience. Okay, I learned to be patient. I learned that you can't take people faster than what they're ready to go, and the wise person understands and does. Um, the wise person does at first what the unwise person does at the end.
Mm,
And
mm.
so I learned really to be patient enough to bring people along, because if you don't, then you wind up taking a walk and nobody's following you.
Wow.
So you can get out ahead of the people. Many things in ministry that I've wanted to do, many of the things that I've wanted to accomplish, to be quite frankly, my church was not ready for that. So I could not accomplish it because I could not get them to where they are. A
Yes.
classmate of mine called me last night, and they're trying to relocate, and uh, the people on a $7 million offer. The people are fussing about, you know, an extra $200,000 on a $7 million issue. And one of the challenges for that particular pastor is, how do you bring people along to get them to move? So I suggested some things to him that I would do in the process, but you couldn't give up. You still have to try to lead.
Yes, sir.
So those are some of the things that I just, learned from that experience that brought me to Oklahoma City and allowed me to be as successful as I have been in terms of ministry. So uh, that, I think, for a young preacher, first job is to get the people to love you. And Dr. A.B. James would say that all the time. A.B. James was our professor of pastoral ministry at the seminary, but Dr. James also had been president of Virginia Union University.
Yes,
And
sir.
he would say that to us all the time. I didn't understand it when we were in the classroom, but I understand it now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well,
That's your first job.
yes, sir. We definitely appreciate that. And so as you talking about, get them to love you and then be patient. So we definitely appreciate those keys. So
Well,
then, mhm,
Maxwell says it like this: people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
right. Yes, sir.
So
Yes,
John
sir.
Maxwell would say that same kind of thing.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so then talk to us about the transition, which is it's a great story how this happens. How you get called to prospect in Oklahoma City. So yeah, you got to tell the story about how you go from Virginia and come back home to Oklahoma City.
Well, I had no intentions of coming back to Oklahoma City. Did not want to come back to Oklahoma City. I thought I would spend my ministry on the East Coast, and that's where I wanted to be, was on the East Coast. Well, I came home for Christmas one year, and um, my mom was here, and my father had passed away my first year in seminary while I was in Virginia. So I make the track home every year. Well, this particular year I was coming home, and my roommate, Pastor Paul Lowe, who pastors in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Shiloh Baptist Church, as well as being a state senator in North Carolina. He was my
Wow.
roommate, and we came to Oklahoma City. I called Dr. W.K. Jackson, said, I'm coming home. Of course, we had a standing invitation as sons of the church. When we came, we could preach. So I asked him if Paul Lowe could preach at St. John. He said, yeah. He said, if you want him to preach, yes, that's fine. Well, while we were traveling to come to Oklahoma City, then Prospect, the pastor, resigned here. And so they needed a preacher. Dr. Jackson said, well, my son is coming home, so he needs something to do. So he let him preach, you know. So I preached that Sunday. They asked me to come back the next Sunday. I preached the next Sunday. I'm 26 years old, by the way,
Yes, sir.
and preached the next Sunday. And then they asked me, well, can you come back? And I said, I can't because I'm going to Waco to preach at New Hope. And at that time, they said, well, can we talk to you? And we ended up going to dinner, having dinner with the deacons. The deacons acted as the pulpit committee and said, we believe that he's our next pastor. Took my name to the church, and a month later, I'm back here in Oklahoma City and at Prospect Church. So I resigned from there. I had enrolled in school to work on a second master's at Presbyterian School of Christian Education. And the long and short of it is I ended up back in Oklahoma City just that fast, just a couple of months in the process. Now, I also, at the time, had candidated for churches all over the nation,
Right.
and but ended up here.
Yes, sir. And so when you first get to Prospect, talk to us about those early years, because people see Prospect now, but they don't know, but they, don't know about the early years of your ministry at Prospect. Like I said, you've been blessed to share that with me, and it's been a blessing, and I believe it'll be a blessing to those who are watching about your, as you say, your patience, from your first experience to getting the Prospect. So talk to us about those early years and the ups and downs, those things that went on when you came back home to Prospect.
Well, when I came to Prospect, Prospect again had gone through several splits. I was the fourth pastor in 10 years at Prospect. The previous pastor that was here had split the church. You could walk up in the sanctuary, which sat probably 200 people, maybe on a good day, and empty an Uzi and not hit nobody, because there were literally 34 members, 7 choir members. And so it was a challenge. Well, when we took up $600 a week, it was a good week, and people don't realize really where the church was. And even now, I can count the number of people at this church who was here before me on both hands. So there were um, uh, less than 40 people that was here, and the Lord, I knew the Lord had led me here, and so I was leaving a better church in Virginia, more members, nice budget, all of those things, come back here, but I knew that the Lord had spoken, and so came back here. Church began to grow, but it was painstaking. Back in that day, we had 2 classrooms, small sanctuary, couldn't pay bills. Um, Most people don't know the story that we had some steel that was here on site that the founding pastor had actually purchased. He wanted to start to build a church. And so there was some steel here on the property. That steel I used to border, to really come to an agreement with a man who had a tractor and a bush hog. There was 8 acres of land here. So that was here when I got here. But we were getting citations because we needed to have it cut. And I went to him and said, I'll give you this steel if you'll cut the yard. Really, what I was doing was trying to buy time to grow this church and to move it forward. And like I said, when we took up $600 a week, boy, that was a good week on a good Sunday. And to see where we are now is, pretty amazing. So through the years, though, there's been a lot of ups and downs and in ministry. But the one thing that I say to young preachers is to be faithful. Be faithful. God has not called you to be successful. He's called you to be faithful. And if you're faithful, then he'll take care of everything else. So I've never really gone without, even when the church under my leadership has split and
Mhm.
people said you couldn't make it without us, and money left out the door. I'm telling you, 75% of my money walked out the door the first Sunday in March of 1991. And they said, you cannot make it without us. And uh, I'm still here.
Yes, sir. I remember you telling me that story as well when you talked about something. A lot of members just up and left on a Sunday morning, and
Yes.
so Uncle, you go through these things, and it's like, but you know God has called you, as you say, you believe God has called you, and there might be somebody who is at one situation, but they feel as though God is calling them somewhere else. But you said something very important about being faithful. So talk to us about, those keys, or encourage a pastor who may be feeling like I'm being faithful, but I feel the Lord is calling me somewhere else, or I'm being faithful, but I also feel like my labor is a little bit in vain because I'm not seeing the fruits really develop. I'm not seeing the fruits really grow.
Well, the first thing I would say to you is patience becomes important. The
Mm-hmm.
reason patience is important is because you don't want to jump out of the frying pan into the fire.
Right.
And so, I've had opportunities to leave. The last time that it was a serious consideration for me was when Greater New Mount Moriah in Detroit, Michigan was vacant.
Hmm.
And it appeared that that's where the Lord was going to send me. Previous pastor had retired from uh, the NAACP, and they thought, well, he would come to full time, be pastor full time there, and he did not, and so it ended up being me and Pastor Flowers, who is there now. But I'm so glad Pastor Flowers got that church, and the Lord left me in Oklahoma City.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, I definitely, well, like I said, we definitely appreciate that. You talking to us about being faithful. As going through these
Now,
transitions. Go ahead.
yeah, now let me say this. There are times at which God gives to you release
Right.
and says that it's time to move on.
Right.
But you just have to be clear about it being him
Right.
and not your frustration about the situation.
Yes,
And
sir.
so that allows uh, you to be set free by him.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
When he does that, then he's also preparing something else.
Yes, sir.
So that's what you have to be clear about.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you're going through these transitions at Prospect, you've been blessed to build a new building. The Lord's blessed your ministry to build a new edifice, and then of
Couple
course,
of
yeah, I'm
yeah.
about to say, then of course the family life center in the back, which is a beautiful building, by the way. So then talk to us, because this is also where I wanted to really ask you, because you've been instrumental in me talking to me about the importance of making sure, if you're doing a building project, to oversee it, to make sure you have everything in a row. Because I remember a conversation you had with me, you told me about this, about, before you build, make sure you look at everything first and make sure you have everything in place so that there's no hiccup. So talk to us about the importance of building and making and if somebody's in this situation where they feel like it's time to build, about what steps they need to take.
Well, the Bible talks about make sure that you count the cost before you build,
Right.
and I think that becomes really important. It seems to be so glamorous to build something until a lot of people overbuild, or they build too much, or it sets them back. It just so many horror stories of contractors and other things. So um, the first thing I would say is make sure that is the Lord again leading you to build, and He'll
Mhm.
let you know when it's time to do so. And sometimes you're ahead of the people because you see as pastor what they don't see.
Right.
But it's crucially important that it's him that's leading you in the building process or in the moving or purchasing process as well. And if so, then he's going to give you everything you need to be able to do that. But as you begin the process, then it becomes important to oversee that process because we know the horror stories of bad contractors
Hmm.
and everything else. And I was fortunate enough to have people placed in my presence. And I was listening to the Lord to be able to hear him speak, to say, this is who we need. This is who I want you to use. And so uh, just making sure that the people are following you as you are moving through the process of building. Again, I say to you that if you're too far, now you're going to always be in front of the people. You're going to always be, because that's what you are. You're the pastor. You're the visionary. You see what they don't see, but you've got to bring them along so that they see as we go. They
Right.
see.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and
Yes, sir.
so that becomes really crucial and important.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, definitely appreciate that, as you say.
And want to make sure that you don't overbuild,
Hmm.
because the finance company was telling me, well, we can give you more money, and people were saying, well, we need this and we need that. Well, no, we can't have this and that because this and that costs money. You Negroes will have me out here, and we'll be trying to sell all kind of chitlin dinners and everything else, trying to get it done, and so that becomes important as well.
Yes, sir. Well, that's definitely very helpful. Uncle Coop, I want to hit on this because I believe this is also important. And if you are comfortable, Uncle Coop did you pastoring, but have children. And then you had your first wife who did go home to be with the Lord. So going through that, being a single pastor, raising your children, and then pastoring, but you also had to deal with your own grief. So talk to us about pastoring while grieving.
Well, I want you to know that I pastored this church
Hmm.
single twice. When I was called to this church,
Yes,
I was
sir.
married and got married after I was called to the church.
Yes, sir.
Then my wife passed away, left me with two boys, one 10 and one 13. And for them, it was traumatic. And so I had to try to manage my grief as well as help them through theirs and to help the church through its grief as well. Um, and so in both cases, I pastored the church single. And one thing I would say, is don't ever, if possible, now if the Lord gives you somebody in your church, then that's one thing, but don't mess around in your church, just go on about your business, and on down the road somewhere. But in that process, though, um, I have a church with uh, with a lot of PKs.
Hmm.
They several of them are on my deacon board. That was a blessing for me because they protected me. They made sure that I was, not at the church alone when I was here. They took my kids to basketball practices and took them to uh, WWE wrestling events. I mean, they were really good, to me and to help me to move through it. Now, also, both of my boys were really good kids. They were involved in sports and everything, but they were good kids. They were where they said they were going to be when they were going to be there, and that made pastoring a little bit easier for me when I had young men that were growing up and they were responsible and they were not causing me a bunch of grief and a bunch of headaches. So I was blessed in those ways. But the whole time in picking both of my spouses was really about listening to God and saying, Lord, I need you to give me the insight and wisdom. And He gave me two really beautiful women, and not just physical beauty, but spiritual beauty. And
Right.
so that has helped me in ministry as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I think you hit on something that was very important about being a single pastor. Uh, as you said, just go about your business. Because Uncle Cool will be
We,
very blunt with some
we,
things. And but I mean, but help us out with that. Being a single pastor, single preacher, but especially being a single pastor about what to do and what not to do when it comes to dating.
well, I think that it is crucially important for you to have character and integrity,
Right.
so that you're above board about your relationship and you operate in honesty and in truth.
Right.
And to be able to say, as you are dating, that this is only a date, okay? That I'm interested in spending time to get to know you, but there's no strings attached, no promises made. And I don't know of any woman that doesn't want more than that. But it is crucially important for you to be able to operate with that sense of integrity. I was talking with a roommate of mine who pastors in Miami just last week about this very thing, and that is just being above board and honest. Now, that does not mean that the person that you may end up taking out doesn't take it somewhere else, but you have to have the integrity to be above board and to make sure that you're communicating that, regardless as to what they may be believing, you're communicating that very clearly.
Right. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, you hit it. You hit it on the right there on the nose for it in that regard. And then there's another thing I want you to talk to us about before, because I want to close when it comes to preaching in the library. But I do want you to help us with this as we talked about, because this is another part of conversation that you talked to me about and that you challenged me as well. Talk to us about, as a preacher, the importance of making sure you have good life insurance, that you have retirement, that you have money to where once you step down, that you can step down and don't have to squeeze the church, if you will, to still be able to make it. Talk to us about that. Give us those tips, because I think that would be very important.
I really believe in that because I've seen too many horror stories of pastors, many of them who have spent their life, preaching all across the length and breadth of this country, and then people have to then take up money to either bury them or to take care of them, once that time comes. So it becomes crucially important to make sure that you handle your business uh, financially, to make sure that you're not spending all that comes in and that you're making plans and preparations. I am coming up on that time in ministry where I know that I will be stepping aside. But I knew that this day was going to come when I start putting stuff aside at 26. So from the very start, I've had a deacon, Marvin Provo, who was a financial planner, and started putting money away to make sure that when that day of retirement comes, that I'm able to retire. And so the moves that I've been able to make have been moves um, that that are important. I have credit cards in my wallet right now, but none of them are revolving accounts. Every one of them I pay off at the end of the month. So whatever I spend for that month, I pay for it. So I'm not carrying debt. The only debt that I have is my, home that I have. But I don't have any other debt. My cars are paid for. I drive nice vehicles, always have. I can drive whatever I choose to drive, live where I choose to live because I've made good decisions long time ago.
Yes,
So
sir.
now I'm living off of that. So you can work for money, or you can have money work for you.
Mm.
And so when you come to the place where you start investing, then money starts working for you.
Yes, sir.
And that's where you want to be.
Yes, sir. Wow. Wow. That's definitely heavy right there. And that's why I asked you the question, because that's what we needed to hear about, making
Well,
sure.
yeah, and that comes at a cost. I don't want you to think that it doesn't come without a cost. But those people who know me know that I have gators, but I may not have as many gators as somebody else may have.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I wear tailored shirts. Okay. Sir Charles makes my shirts. I mean, you can wear tailored clothes, but it's about making sure you do the other things. As the Bible says, not leave the weightier matters undone.
Mm.
Okay, so it's about making sure that whatever is coming through my hands, that I'll be able to live for the rest of my life on the same par and level that I'm living now.
Yes, sir.
And we're having these conversations with people around me, my peers, Pastor Williams in Indianapolis, Ralph West in Texas. We all know that we're coming to the end of the road. Some of us are planning to retire. Others of us are planning to continue to pastor. But whatever that decision and whatever that looks like for you, you've got to make that decision. So I want to have my church, all of the buildings and everything I want paid off for the next person who is going to come in. They'll come into a situation where they will create their own debt, and they will, be able to work through that process, but they won't be uh, encumbered by the debt that I've accumulated and left for them. The same thing with my family. My family will have no debt when I close my eyes.
Yes,
And
sir.
that could be next year, uh, maybe not. Okay, but it
We're
could be,
praying not.
anytime, yeah, anytime, that they won't have that burden
Yes,
because
sir.
I've got my house in order. I've got enough insurance. They won't have to worry about those kinds of things.
Yes, sir. Well, I definitely appreciate that because I think that's definitely very important for us to have that conversation when it comes to making sure that we are putting money aside, saving money, as you say, even investing, just so we can have as my dad would say, as you've told me, that's that extra source of income. So when that time does come, like you told me a long time ago, hey, I'm gone. And so, so I believe that is very important. So I definitely appreciate your insight into that. So then talk to us about. I got a couple more questions on Kuba. You've been so generous, and I'm gonna leave you alone for just for today. I'm gonna leave you alone just for today. So talk to us about building a library, the importance of reading, the importance of growing as a preacher in reading. Talk to us about building that library.
Well, if you're going to really be effective in ministry, it is going to require of you to be a reader, and you want to read everything that you can possibly get your hands on. So when you look at my library, there are I've got several stacks of books.
Yes.
Those things that I must read, those things that I would like, that I need to read, and then those things that I would like to read. So I've got these stacks of books, and I think you've got to read from all of those. Okay, not only the stuff that I have to read for preparation of teaching, preaching, those kinds of things. The things that I need to read, which are the things that may be uh, related to where we are in our the move of our society. So it may not be religious necessarily, but it may be secular. It may be something that I need to know about, need to read about, those things. And then I have the things that I want to read, and when I have free time, I can pick those things up because this is something that's enjoyable to me, that I
Right.
want to read this. So you got the stuff that you're working on, and sermons that you're working on for teaching, that you're reading about for some direction in terms of leadership for your people, all of those things. Then you got the things that you should read, and then you got the things that you want to read. And so all of those things become important. And I I don't advocate any one particular area. I think you need to read a cross section of everything.
Yes, sir.
So newspapers, magazines, all of those things, those have preaching material all the time that are there.
Yes, sir.
So um, you just have to read all the time. I was reading a biography of Booker T. Washington this week, and him and the Atlanta Compromise and what that meant. But I mean, you just read as much as you can possibly read, and that becomes important because you also don't uh, know when the Lord is going to put you in a situation where you will need those things.
Hmm.
So, I've been chaplain at the Senate and everything, and just that just allowed me to draw on things I've already read, and so I think that becomes important.
And let me just say, Uncle Cooper's done a great job because he, for a little while, was he was part of Ward 7 councilman, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, yeah, I was a commissioner, planning
Yep.
commissioner for the city of Oklahoma City. From there, went to be Ward 7 councilman, and from there, I'm on the urban renewal board now. I'm a commissioner for Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Board, as well as the economic development arm for the city of Oklahoma City. So all of those hats I still wear.
And if you haven't seen, a few weeks ago, that Uncle Coop was in, I believe, the state chambers down.
Yeah,
Weren't you downtown?
yeah.
State chambers downtown, and of course, Uncle Coop does what Uncle Coop does. He preaches, tell it like it is. And but I want to. I thank you, and I know so many thank you, and we support you because you weren't afraid to be bold. You weren't afraid, as you said, that prophetic voice. You were that prophetic voice that we all need, and some walked out, but Uncle Koo said it so well that just like only you can go. Uncle Koo said, "Go ahead and walk out. It's happened before. It won't be." But it's true. But the way you were prophetic in that moment, and you didn't stop, but you preached what was right and what was true and what needed to be said, and for that, seriously, Uncle, we thank you for doing that.
Well, I've again been cut out of that cloth of Dr. W.K. Jackson.
Yes,
And
sir.
so I think it is crucially important for us as pastors that we don't obfuscate our responsibility to be prophetic.
Yes, sir.
The Black preacher is prophet and preacher. And prophet means that sometimes you have to speak truth to power.
Yes, sir.
And the Black church needs a voice now more than ever
Yes,
to
sir.
speak the truth to power. Now, I think it becomes important. It's not my first time, I'm
Right.
all the time, with several years ago, when we started in on police reform here in Oklahoma City, and we're going through that now, but it didn't just start this year. We've been working on police reform for years, and so that, along with making sure that when the racetrack came into the city, they were hiring no blacks in management positions. They were only entry level jobs that they were hiring minorities. We had to go in and say, no, this won't happen here. Okay, we need some blacks in management positions and in the upper echelons of the organization. Well, we didn't have to do that with the Thunder. They were coming from, Seattle, and they came in with a commitment to diversity. But just important for us, and particularly as young preachers, particularly now, to be able to speak truth to power. But that also means that when you do that, you have to make sure that you're not carrying dirty laundry that
Mm.
can be used against you to, in many ways, take away your voice.
Wow.
So it doesn't mean very much if you got a bunch of dirty laundry. You can't be that voice. So that's why it becomes important for how you carry yourself and how you move in ministry with a sense of integrity and above reproach. Because I promise you, every time that I have been out front on issues, speaking for the community, not for me, speaking for the community, they have tried their best to find stuff that they could bring up to discredit my voice. And I refuse to be silent. And I think for your generation, you need to know how important it is to be above reproach so that they can't silence your voice.
Yes, sir. Wow. Yes, sir. That's That's very important. I thank you for sharing that as well. I really thank you for sharing that, Uncle, because I think that's very important. I was going to ask you about that, but you just hit on it. You really hit us and helped us with that as well. And so, last thing, and then, like I said, I'll leave you alone. Talk to us just about preaching. Whether your preaching process, what encourages you, what discourages you about preaching. Just talk to us about just your views on preaching.
Well, most people don't realize or recognize the cost of a sermon.
You're right.
They don't realize this time of study. They think you just kind of stand up and open up your mouth and it just happens. But in this preaching process, I'm here to tell you that Sundays come fast, and for uh, for most, I don't always do a good job of it, but planning your preaching becomes important. Being able to preach series of sermons allows you the freedom to be able to make sure that you know where you're going from week to week. You have to make sure your preaching is balanced.
Yes, sir.
That you have it's just like preparing a meal. You want to make sure that that meal is balanced so that your people are being fed a balanced diet.
Yes,
So
sir.
you're preaching on prayer, you're preaching on faith, you're preaching on finances, you're preaching on marriage, you're preaching on all of the things that affect people in their life and their struggle. So making sure that your preaching is balanced. And generally, um, uh, most of us have uh, a kind of process that we're going through at on a weekly basis. So on Mondays, we're usually reading and beginning to pull things together for where you're trying to go. If you already know, you know what you're preaching on, what the series is about, so you're doing that work. Usually, I take some people start on Sunday evenings. I happen to take Sunday evenings off because I need some time to come down from the Sunday morning. But Monday we start into that planning and that preparation. So then now on Tuesday, there is the framework that's usually coming together for what that looks like. So by Wednesday, I'm working out whatever illustrations may be in the preaching process that I'm using. I'm looking for them. I'm searching maybe things that I've already read, maybe things that I'm looking for in personal experience. So by Thursday, I have to have my stuff to my communications team, and
Okay.
then on Friday is finishing touches that may be a part of that sermon process. Saturday is, kind of
Right.
relaxed and I'm going over what I plan to preach. Now, you can have any number of things in that week that actually impede the process or may, infringe on that process. You may
Right.
have two funerals that week.
Right.
So you're also getting ready for that, and so you got that to deal with. You got if you're writing, then you've got that to deal with. So if you're writing a book or writing articles, or if you're doing workshops or something, teaching whatever, that all of that invades on the process. But that's kind of a framework for me.
Okay. Well, I definitely appreciate that as well. Like I said, I've told Uncle Coop this privately, and I say it publicly about how much he means to me as a preacher because he's always been generous to me, allowing me opportunities to preach because Prospect is another home for me, and he's been generous and loving and cutting me up in a good way, because that's just our relationship. But like I told him, it saved my ministry, the fact that he did that and that he cared enough about me to do that. And that meant so much to me, because sometimes when we see people celebrate, we think we really did something. And I had to realize that, no, not really. So Uncle Coop mentioned Dr. John Mangrum, and when he mentioned that, and then I thought about it as I was driving home when I was still in Texas, I was like, it hurt. It hurt for a little bit, but then I was like, you know what, Uncle Coop was right. So I appreciate, you give me, as I tell you all the time, those opportunities, but also that you love us enough to help us, to challenge us. And so I thank you for that from the bottom of my heart. That's because I love you. And me and Uncle Coop, the reason I call him Uncle Coop is because this relationship goes back farther than I've been living, because Uncle Coop and my mom literally grew up together from kindergarten to high school seniors.
We lived a few blocks from each other, and
Yeah.
so I know your grandmother, and so I took special interest in you because you are a young man that had an interest in preaching.
Yes, sir.
And so I know that it's in you, and I know that you're going to be just great. And so I really thank God for our relationship and the
Yes, sir.
process of how it has grown over the years. And so, of course, anything I can do, always let me know. Okay.
Oh yes, yes, sir.
Yeah.
So, Uncle, is there anything else on your heart, or you want to tell people about your church, tell people about Prospect as well, and then we'll get ready to close.
Well, Prospect is a loving, caring fellowship here in Northeast Oklahoma City. I invite you to come and share anytime. Our services are online. We're online streaming, Facebook, YouTube, 9:30 a.m. on Sunday mornings here at the Prospect Church. And so you can join us at our website, Prospect, www.prospectokc.org. Is the website, and you can get more information there. And thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for the time that we were able to spend together, Pastor Brown.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Uncle Pastor, Reverend Dr. Lee Cooper Jr., proud pastor of the Prospect Missionary Baptist Church. So God bless you all. Continue to like and share, and we look forward to talking to you next.